Hey everyone. I'm going to just give a few thoughts. Not a whole lot of flash or anything like that. No music or anything like any of the normal stuff that we do. No liturgy. Just a real brief message of some encouragement today. At Christmas time, we tend to focus on Jesus as a newborn king coming into the world to radically recreate things, to overturn systems of oppression and start a reign of peace. The problem is that it never happened. That is, Jesus never overturned anybody's reign. And despite the few kings that were afraid that Jesus would do that, we're still, here. We're still living under tyrannical regimes. Jesus didn't overturn anything. Jesus didn't become king in the way that we wanted or maybe thought Jesus should. But still, we celebrate. And I think it's right that we should. First, because if Jesus just became a mighty warrior and took over nations or dethroned kings by force, he would just be as bad as every other king. Second, because by living and dying the way that Jesus did, he offered us another view of what power and kingship and love and community and justice can be. And third, I think that Jesus overturning the kingdoms of his day would have been short-sighted. There will always be more regimes to overturn. There will always be more injustice to face. And if Jesus just came and did it once and for all, then what would the rest of us do afterwards? Instead of trying to overturn the governments of his day, Jesus instead focused on giving us the tools to overturn injustice and to make the world that we want to see forever, anytime into the future that injustice showed up. So where do we start to overturn injustice? And I think the way that we think about God is a good place. I heard a sermon a number of years ago that started with 1 Corinthians 13. It's a famous passage about love. It goes like this: Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. The sermon, in this sermon that I heard, it suggested that we replace the word love in that text with our own name as an invitation to check in, see how we're doing. So, Chad is patient, Chad is kind, Chad is not envious or boastful. Am I those things? Does that sound right? But I want to ask a different question this morning. There's another powerful passage in the scripture in the book of 1 John that reads like this: Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. God is love. If God is love, wouldn't it make sense to reread that 1 Corinthians passage, and instead of replacing our own name with love, what if we replaced the word love with God? Wouldn't that tell us as much about our view of God as it would about ourselves? God is patient. God is kind. God is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. God does not insist on God's own way. God is not irritable or resentful. God does not rejoice in wrongdoings, but rejoices in the truth. God bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. God never ends. If we believe that God is love, this is an important test. Does God really keep no record of wrongs? Is God really not easily angered? For many people, the answer is, of course, God does keep record of wrongs. Of course, God is easily angered. And if we listen to them, God is angry all the time about every wrong you've ever done. If you assert that God is love, and yet you imagine God as a short-tempered and judgmental entity, then we have to judge your ideas of God as falling short of the standard of love. Isn't that a problem? There's a passage in Matthew chapter 5, and it challenges us to do more than is typical for the human beings and the human cultures around us in order to emulate God. It says that we're supposed to love those, even those who don't love us. Yet, more often than not, Christians have portrayed God as somebody who loathes those who do not love God. The late Eva Kor and many other Holocaust survivors have emphasized that forgiveness is less about the ones who have wronged us and more about liberating ourselves from a hatred and resentment that otherwise might have consumed us. Harboring a grudge gives the other person power over you. And if we imagine God as someone who never lets go of resentment or keeps record of wrongs, what would that mean? Is that concept of God inferior to the people who extend forgiveness, for example, to people who have murdered their families? And we've heard many, many times instances of family members forgiving those who actually killed members of their family. Is our view of God less than them? Is God less loving than them? The God worshipped by the forgiving must be at least as forgiving as they are, if not more so. So here's where we begin. God is love. If God is love, right, then God is love with everything that means. So we have to abandon everything that we imagine God to be that isn't consistent with love. And when we do, and we arrange our lives in such a way that this is our cornerstone, we've taken our first step towards helping Jesus to create a better world. So, focus on love, focus on God being love, focus on how you and God might join together to bring about the world that you want to see. Merry Christmas, and make sure that you love the ones around you especially well this year. Have a great day.